the desired behavior. With that, we'll call the meeting to order. And I hope everybody had a chance to review the minutes that went out. They were extremely detailed. Thank you, I guess, to Tim's team for filling in. Since we no longer have a person in Brooke's role, they filled in to provide the very detailed minutes. Did anyone have any comments on the minutes or any amendments to the minutes? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion from the floor to approve the minutes as submitted.
So move.
Thank you, Patty. Any second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Paul. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
I see a lot of
Aye.
hands and thumbs ups. Great. Any opposition? Okay, minutes are approved. See what we have. With that, we'll go into the director's report. Director Long.
Bonnie, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us today. Also, I want to apologize for getting our Bureau monthly report out so late. Generally, we try to send that with the packet, but it was sent last night. And I don't imagine that any of you got to take a look at it, but when you do get a chance, I really encourage you to read all of it. In particular, I want to point out there's amazing work happening everywhere, but I was especially taken by the amount of work that's occurring through our PRMS division. We've had a lot of failures and deficiencies and emergencies that they've responded to recently, and those are detailed in the report, as is many other amazing work that our staff is doing. In terms of operations, though, I also wanted to give a kudos to recreation and rangers for coordinating and staffing warming centers at a few of our community centers during the severe weather event that happened a couple of weeks ago. PRMS responded to numerous damages to prepare for guests and to make our centers whole after the guests left, and helped us return those centers back to normal operations. And want to also mention Lands and Urban Forestry, who continue to keep our parks safe and clean, even when there's snow and ice on the ground and most people are trying to huddle in their homes. So kudos to them as well. I also want to mention on the operations front, in the last month, you've probably heard about 2 trees that failed at the North Park blocks. Urban Forestry spent many hours cutting and removing those trees. The rangers helped with securing the scene of one of those failed trees by removing campers who were in the vicinity. And in the case of the second tree, PRMS repaired the damaged sidewalk very quickly. Subsequently, tree inspectors have assessed the remaining trees in that park, which are of similar age and identical growing conditions, and they will be sharing recommendations with the commissioner's office about next steps. So I just wanted to let everyone know about that. I know it's gotten a lot of press time. The other thing I wanted to note is COVID-19. If somebody remarked about us going through a second spike. So as you're likely aware, due to the Omicron variant, Governor Brown extended the COVID-19 emergency declaration until June 30th of 2022. The county has only extended their declaration through the end of March, and currently the city's declaration is good through January 13th. But we expect that the city will extend the declaration to mimic that of the county and the state. It's been happening over the last couple of years. We're just usually a couple steps behind. That being said, the Bureau has seen an uptick in COVID-related intakes and positive cases. So we've had several staff who've been impacted by COVID. We're taking efforts to identify testing opportunities that might be available to staff, as long as they meet criteria around workplace transmission. So the other thing that is happening in response to this sort of surge is that Recreation has modified masking requirements to include gameplay at our community centers and at the tennis center. So previously you did not necessarily have to wear a mask while playing tennis and basketball. So we are now requiring that as a part of the programming. We've also created an amended policy and tracking tool for notifications around program cancellations and facility hours that that may shift related to these COVID health impacts. So oftentimes if we lose an instructor, we don't have backup. Or if we lose too many staff, we might have to shift our hours in the community center. So it's just something that we've been experiencing a little bit more of in the last couple of weeks, and we anticipate that that will continue. But we have tools in place to handle it, and of course everything goes through social media and on our websites and everything else. So hopefully we're keeping the community informed as we have to make changes. Pause for a moment to see if anyone has any questions. Oh wait, Casey, you're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't have a question about that. I had an overall question. I can wait till the end. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks.
I'll call on you again. Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland. I mentioned that as being one of my New Year's resolutions. I just wanted to note that the listening and learning team is starting to prepare for wave 2 of community listening and learning. And we anticipate that will begin sometime in February, and that work will continue through June. The mission, vision, values, and racial equity statement team has been meeting to draft a new mission, vision, values, and racial equity statement. And these drafts will be shared for input and feedback during that second wave of community listening and learning. It's been tremendously rewarding work being on that team, I'll note. And the internal prep team for actions and results has worked with divisions to identify performance measures related to levy commitments and capture existing measures that relate to racial equity. This work has been completed for the fiscal year 22-23 requested budget, which will be submitted later on this month. And you'll hear a little bit more about that when the financial stability working groups reports out in a few moments. Community members have been recruited to serve on the actions and results team, and we anticipate again that sometime in February they will begin their work around reviewing the existing metrics and gaps and help to prioritize our work moving forward. Once the Bureau has draft outcomes in the spring, we will begin documenting the Bureau's work in the actions and results framework, identifying gaps and prioritizing work to fill those gaps. So I just wanted to pause and thank everyone who has and will contribute to this ambitious and important work. So thank you. Noted on the agenda for upcoming council items, tomorrow we'll be requesting that council authorize a bid for construction of the Columbia Children's Arboretum Improvement Project. Just as a reminder, the estimated cost is $2.25 million, and we're aiming to have the notice to proceed with construction by early April. I think I gave quite a bit of details on this project at our last board meeting, so I won't get into that, but they should be recorded in the minutes if anyone's interested in learning a little bit more about them. And then also on the agenda, just we noted some upcoming Portland Parks and Recreation events that are open to the public and that we encourage and invite all board members to attend. I'll note that the Overlook Park and the A Park Nature Patch ribbon cutting event requires an RSVP, and we'll make sure to get that out to everyone having an RSVP, just because it's both are smaller parks and limited parking. So we hope that you'll come out to those. Again, I will pause see if anyone has any questions about my report, or if you had a chance to read the written report, if you have any questions about that as well.
Thank you, Director Long. Did anyone have any questions? Casey, you had something earlier. Maybe, did you want to ask that now?
I did, and the information I have may be dated, so I apologize if it is, but I understand that the members of the district council trade unions may go on strike, or the members of the city may go on strike, and I wondered if that's going to affect parks at all, and if so, how?
Yes, we have approximately 25 individuals that have serving classifications that are covered by DCTU. And so we're working with our colleagues throughout the city, you know, to identify what we can anticipate happening, and you know, staying on top of the bargaining that's been going on. We will be putting together a continuity of operations plan in those instances where we have staff who are providing services that might be disruptive or impactful to our operations if a strike were to occur, especially if it were to be more than just a few days. So we only have a few areas where we have a little bit of concern, but we are working towards making sure that we've got backup plans. And I'll see if Margaret has anything to add to that. And I don't think Todd's with us just yet. So
Actually, you covered it really well. Thank you, Director Long.
yeah, I pay attention sometimes. Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you for the question, Casey. Thank you, Dr. Long, for the thorough report. And yes, I, for one, did not have a chance to review the written report yet, but I hope that, you know, if we have questions, you will entertain them, and no worries on the, you know, bumpiness with a vacancy in a critical role. These things happen. We'll try to see if we can prevent them in the future. With that, we're going to move into the working group reports. I just wanted to add before we went to the working group reports that I really appreciated all the participation in the breakouts from last time. That information is going to go into what the community engagement working group is going to be doing as part of the community engagement strategy. So we're going to they're going to come up with a proposal in terms of the time of the meeting and what will be proposed at that time. So with that, Erin, Community Engagement Working Group.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bonnie. So yeah, on that note, our group continues to talk about the both the public comment procedure and then also forming kind of a broader strategy and plan around both board visibility and community engagement at the board level. And so board meeting time, now we have feedback, I think will be a part of that next process. And when we're talking about strategy, et cetera. So we're hoping, our goal right now is to be able to bring something to the board by the time that the water features turn on in the parks. So, you know, that's a good time to have this kind of ramped up and ready to go. We want to bring something comprehensive to the board. So although we feel that the public comment procedure we've kind of worked on and is in a good place, we want to bring it hand in hand with the strategy, because I think on its own, it won't be as contextualized as it could be with understanding, with having a kind of strategy behind it. So that's been the most of our conversation has been around that. We've talked about other things that have come up. One of the things that came up was that, and maybe would be nice for a future board meeting, is learning a little bit more about how Portland Parks and Recreation, the Parks Foundation, and the Parks Board kind of operate together. I think that might be helpful for board members to have maybe a little bit deeper understanding of. And then
Erin, I'm going to interrupt you just briefly there. We asked Randy to provide a little primer on that in during his time today.
Well, look at that. Okay, getting stuff done. I like it. Great. And yeah, so I think that kind of covers it, unless any other members of the group have additions.
Thank you, Erin. Did any of the other members have anything to add, or were there any questions for Aaron or the group? Okay, if not, we'll move to financial sustainability work group. Mike.
Thanks, Bonnie. So in our last working group meeting, Dylan Paul gave us an overview of the property and business development group that he manages. We had requested this meeting really just as an educational session intended to give our working group a better understanding of the services provided through his group and how Park utilizes its asset portfolio and the services that the group provides to generate additional revenue to the Bureau. Just as a little bit of background, there's really 3 core functions through which this group generates revenues. The largest is through their customer service center. In a typical year, they issue over 5,000 permits for various events like picnics, sporting events, parks programming and weddings and things like that. But in addition to that, secondly, there are non-park use permits, which are permits for use of parks property by public and private entities for more commercial purposes, such as construction, staging, utility relocations, things like that that are kind of outside the normal operational core of what Parks does. And then finally, revenues are also generated through various real estate transactions, property transactions, including leases for assorted park properties. All in all, in a typical year, the revenues from these activities are about $3.5 to $4 million. So when taken in context of Parks' overall budget and the expenses that go along with providing these services, the numbers aren't super impactful from a financial perspective, but they do help to serve towards the greater Parks mission. So that's kind of the underlying thing that we're trying to take into account here. So this was really valuable context for our working group to better understand the structure and the functions of this division and how it contributes to Parks' overall mission. Just a little staffing update. The position of financial planning and analysis manager, which was previously held by Jason Smith, has been filled. We've worked pretty closely with Jason in the past, so this is really good news. Bob Delghese, I think that's the name, will start in the position effective January 20th. He joins Parks from the Housing Bureau and brings nearly 2 decades of experience with the city in financial management of large bureaus. So I think there's still 3 positions, if I remember right, left to fill on this team, and Bob's going to play a role in that process as well. Just a quick budget update for the 2022-2023 budget. There's no significant changes from my update from the last board meeting. As I mentioned in the last meeting, the focus of the budget is going to be to absorb and implement the significant number of decisions that were made in the fall. So as a result of that, there weren't a lot of new asks from division managers this past December. I think there were 14 which were scored using the revised decision support tool. And just as a context for those 14 proposals, last fall, as a result of the levy, there were 34 new proposal requests. So that kind of gives you a sense for the scope of how much was done last fall and how much needs to be absorbed coming into this year. I think the recommendations were presented to Commissioner Rubio last week and are going to be reviewed by the Budget Advisory Committee on Thursday and are due to the council on the 26th. And then just one last quick note on the BAC process. The BAC is composed of board members, primarily from the Financial Sustainability Working Group, but also include labor representatives and members of various community groups. There's a lot of repetition in content between our working group meetings and the BAC meetings, where typically our working group meetings get a little bit deeper into specifics. So to try to eliminate some of this repetition and to use our time a little more thoughtfully, starting in the fall, the BAC is going to be integrated into our scheduled working group meetings. We'll be working on developing a plan for how best to integrate the non-board BAC members into our scheduled meetings so that we're sure to get all the appropriate community input. That's going to be a key consideration in all of this. So I think that's everything I have. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? Any questions?
Thanks, Mike, for that really thorough and thoughtful report. Did any other members have anything they wanted to add, or were there any questions for Mike or the group? Okay, with that, we'll move to land use and infrastructure. Patty.
Thank you, Bonnie. We met last Tuesday. We had a presentation from Multnomah County on progress with the Burnside Bridge, the earthquake redesign process. The whole process has been extended by almost a year because of the need to reduce the projected costs of the bridge. So the target range is 800 to 900 million. And as things stand, the bridge is somewhat beyond that. The actual bridge type has not been fully decided yet. There are really three components. The west side, and there's a good idea in concept as to how that will be designed. Basically, there will be no superstructure above the deck. The central piece, the question is having a lift bridge or a bascule, which is what's there at the moment. And the decision, I think, is in favor of bascule. At the east end, there still remains a question as to whether the long support, which is about 650 feet, should be by a tied arch or cable cable suspension. So that question will not be settled until the fall. The expectation is that applications for federal grants will be made towards the end of this year. So there will be a clearer idea in the summer as to exactly what the bridge is going to look like. The architect has not actually been engaged yet, or not fully engaged. So we've really been talking about structural principles and overall costs at this stage. So that moves on. We expected a full meeting this month. It's been postponed until June. So things are slowing down there. The second topic was the level of service report, which you'll recall is about the level of service provided at each of the park's facilities. That report has been in preparation for some time now. The working group had some fairly substantial comments on the draft that we saw a few months ago. And I'm happy to report that staff has been very responsive to those comments. There are a number of changes in the way the material is being presented and the topics that are being, the depth, I should say, of investigation of those topics. So that will be forthcoming soon. I think will be a report to the full board in the near future. Excuse me.
Patty,
Lauren,
sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt you. That's actually being presented today.
It's today, I beg your pardon. Lauren gave us an update on a number of bond issues. One which you probably read about in the paper is the Columbia Children's Arboretum, 28-acre renovation, which is also being presented. So I'll say no more about that. There are other projects at Errol Heights, and there was a small update on the North Portland Aquatic Center, which there was a meeting on that last week. Rose City Playground is a topic I know is dear to Randy's heart, and I think we shall probably hear more about that later. So I won't say any more about that. We have a long list of watch topics, about 12.5 topics that we just kind of keep hold of, knowing that something will come up shortly. Nothing yet on those. So that really covers what we addressed in our latest meeting. Any comments from other members of the working group?
No, that's great. Thanks, Patty.
Go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to say thank you for that concise recap.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, Bonnie, back to you.
Thank you, Patty. Any other working group members wanted to add? Or were there any questions for Patty or for that working group? Okay, if not, we'll move on to Casey with the Board Affairs Working Group.
Thank you, Bonnie. The Board Aaron's already covered the board public comment procedure, and so I won't go through that, but I always appreciate everything that everybody is doing and everybody's participation in the last board meeting working groups or small breakouts. We're working, before we were going to kind of wait for the draft mission of parks to come out before we start to develop our mission, but I think we've gotten to the point where we need to start developing at least ideas for ours, and the working group would start to do that. Had to reach out to Commissioner Rubio's office. Several ideas have been generated from the meetings on effective use of board members and helping PP&R and PP&R staff. Again, we're waiting for that draft of the new parks mission, which I understand might come out in a month or so, maybe 2. We did have some meetings regarding the most effective use of board members and helping PP&R and PP&R staff. Ideas that came from the last breakout sessions, the last board meetings have been compiled, and additional conversations have been had with Dana, Todd, and Tim. Possible meetings of our group in person is being coordinated with Saren, but they've been put on hold because of as Director DeLong noted earlier, in-person meetings may not be occurring until early summer. And then we've been working on the absentee policy and enforcement. Just to remind everybody, absenteeism is considered on a rolling 12-month basis. And if you've been absent in the last 12 months for 3 times, not consecutive, but just 3 times, then it's incumbent upon the chair to go ahead and talk with you regarding continued absences and what may be issues or not. We've had 3 people who have been fall into that category. Bonnie has had the opportunity to talk to Juan, and because of the large amount that of work that Juan is having to deal with regarding COVID is amongst his other duties, Juan is going to come off the board. In addition, Lorena, because of job shifting that she's going to have to do, is also going to come off the board as well. As the nominating committee is going to start picking up work next month, those people will be added, those slots will be added to what they need to discuss. And just a last thing, this is the first board meeting where we've had written reports from the working groups. If anybody has any comments or suggestions, positive or negative, regarding the format, it'd be great to hear from you, so we can figure out how to possibly do it better in the future. If anybody else has any comments or questions from our group, appreciate it. Otherwise, back to you, Bonnie.
Thank you for chairing the group and for the report, Casey. Did anyone have questions for Casey, or did any of the other members have anything they wanted to add? My only question, Casey, and I don't know if this would go to you or to somebody else, but at this point, it seems like we're getting regular written reports now from both Director Long as well as each of the working groups. So the only standing report that we don't receive a written report from is Randy. So I guess I just wanted to point that out. I'm not advocating for a written report or not a written report, but I just wanted to make that as an observation and put it out there for the group's consideration, both yours as the Board Affairs Working Group Chair, as well as for Randy to consider if he wants to do a written report, or if some people feel strongly about Randy giving a written or verbal report. So just an observation on my part. I don't know if anybody has any comments on that. If not, we can move straight into what Randy thinks and his report.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Bonnie, for suggesting I give a primer on the foundation. We can talk about report or not report in the Q&A if that is important to folks. So I'm going to, I've sort of 2 things. I want to qualify this. I had like 2 hours sleep last night because the fire alarm went off below me. And so I'm a little ragged this morning. So if I'm spacey, please excuse me. Second thing is I kind of wanted to give you all, this is a deck that I haven't put together before, because I kind of wanted to give you a little peek under the hood as much as I could, because I would like to think of the Parks Board as allies and in a form ambassadors for the foundation. And the first thing I want to do is kind of give you some basics. Largely, the frequent public perception of, let me get this actually on slideshow. Sorry. Is that that we are kind of the same. When I first got this job, even many of my friends who should have known better thought that I was getting a Dina's job. And that perception kind of trickles down. Even amongst parkies, I would say this is the general perception of the foundation, is that we are a kind of arm of PPR. And this is the actual history. So, PPR, big bureau, we're a little tiny organization, but primarily who we have worked with and for are the communities of donors and activists. And if you look back over our 20-year history, this sort of underlines that. The rule of our projects, which have primarily been capital over history, have been initiated by folks in the private sector or by friends groups or by citizen groups. And the things that have actually been initiated by Portland Parks and Rec have been primarily actually initiated by the commissioner. The one exception to that is Summer Free for All, which also was initiated by the commissioner, I guess. So we really work for the community. And to give you some examples of our capital projects, in the upper left is Holly Farm Park. That was a from scratch park that was actually put together by our founding board chair, Joey Pope, back in the days when you could make a few phone calls and poof, buy some land and make a park. Lower left is Dawson Park, which was funded by Legacy Emmanuel. Upper right is improvements to Selwood, $1 million over 10 years that was given by Tim Boyle and Columbia Sportswear. And lower right is a much lighter touch. We were just the fiscal sponsor, but got friends of Gateway Discovery. No, that's not right. What am I trying to think of? Gateway, the bike park.
Gateway Green.
Gateway Green, thank you. Sorry for my spaciness. Early on, I just wanted to point this out because this overlaps a little bit with my personal history. This is Director Park. We also were the sort of fiduciary instrument in Jordan Schnitzer giving $1 million for that, and Tom Moyer, the developer and neighbor there, transferring the land over. We played a role in that. I just want to say my parks advocacy began with Director Park when I was at the Oregonian as a columnist. I wrote a series of columns. This was going to be a 12-story parking garage. And a lot of my writing, along with some hardy work by Mr. Moyer and former Mayor Goldschmidt, turned this into the park that we now know. So every time you walk by there, just imagine what it could have been, a 12-story parking garage. Our current initiative, since I came on, I recognized and the board recognized that we needed to get out of solely being in the capital projects business because, particularly to meet our equity goals, because capital projects are long, they're very complicated, much more complicated than they were in the Holly Farm days. And so we moved to a more programmatic approach to things. We had been raising money for Summer Free for All and Lunch Plus Play. We got a very prestigious grant from Bank of America Neighborhood Builders to do a mobile play vehicle. That drawing on the upper right was some of the concepts that we were working on before COVID sort of T-boned that, unfortunately. Friends and Allies initiative is something that I put together with Jessica Green, our operations director, to really pull some disparate programs or separate programs that the foundation had been doing into a single initiative. So we took over the Friends and Allies Summit that PPR had been doing but hadn't in a while. And we turned them into two yearly summits, spring for celebration, fall for a work session. along with days of service. We've amped up our small grants program to give out 10 of those each year, and we upped the amounts a bit. I started the Green Dreams Public Conversation Series, which has brought leaders to the stage or to Zoom these days. We've had candidates forums, we've had some really great leadership inspirational talks. And then Paseo was another initiative that I started that isn't supposed to be here. I meant to cut that out of this slide. And then, of course, we played a major role in the 2020 Parks Levy. We more or less had to kind of be the political leaders on that because Commissioner Fish had died and the mayor was busy with many things happening in the city at that time. And so we oversaw and worked with PPR on the early polling, and then also did private polling. We ran the campaign, hired the campaign manager, and we raised over half of the money for the campaign. We like to have fun, and that's something that we've been trying to bring more to the foundation. So Barbara Walker Crossing, our largest project ever, instead of just having a ribbon cutting, we had a street party in the middle of Burnside, shut it down for a Sunday morning for a pancake feed. We had the Grand Ron Color Guard there, and about 1,000 people showed up for that. It was really fun, and we want to keep fun as a major part of our activities and engagement with folks. Who are we? We're a 4-person staff now. We're up from 3 solidly this year. We are fully budgeted and have finally solved some hiring problems. And our board is a pretty interesting group of people. Kia Selly, our chair, is former assets manager for PPR and was interim director before Adina. J.R. Lilly, East Portland Action Plan. Melissa Nato, great family and great fundraiser. Adam Wilson, head of women's sportswear for Nike. Victoria Schwoferman, who's just a dynamo fundraiser for Oregon Food Bank. Subhashini Ganeshan, creative laureate emeritus. It goes on. We have a really great board, along with some, and then of course Mike serves as ex officio, as will Stephen and Adina. And then we have great emeritus folks, Julie Vigeland and Zeri Santner, the former Parks Director. But we're also a lot more than just our board. We have been working over the last 2 years to really build a series of steering committees. Our board is not as diverse as we would like. 4 members out of 14 are BIPOC, but our steering committees for various initiatives are over 50% BIPOC, and we really think of it as kind of our real engagement with the communities of color, and also we look at some of these folks as future board members. Again, back on fun, this was a board initiated project, Pints for Parks, where we actually worked with Gigantic Brewery to do a special edition of their beer. And at that time, Jack Jewsbury from the Timbers was on our board. And why am I suddenly blanking on his name? My lack of sleep is showing here. Help me out. Head of Rangers for Parks.
Vicente Harrison.
Vicente, thank you. And then things like the 20th anniversary poster project. So again, keeping fun in our theme. Budget snapshot. We're last year we were at about $500,000. We're going to be up a little bit because we're raising people's salaries this year. Our revenue comes from mostly individuals. We get a little bit of money from the city, 100,000. That comes from the mayor's budget, not PPR. So that gives you a sense. Some sample project budgets. Barbara Walker Crossing, our largest, at $3.2 million. It goes down the line. Now, we did a survey of our donors last year that I think is important. So the top priorities we heard from our existing donors is that they would like to see us create new parks and play areas in underserved areas, help revive downtown, develop small parks on underused land that may not belong to PPR necessarily, expand our small grants program, And they give out of loyalty to parks, our mission, and particularly they give to special capital projects. We did an independent study kind of looking at the overall funding climate and discovered some interesting things. We're well regarded, but there's just a lot of confusion about the foundation and PPR. And the levy has further complicated that for us. It creates perception that PPR is fully funded, and few donors understand the different colors of money, capital versus operating. And many potential constituents don't really understand the value proposition of supporting the foundation. And so that's why they're drawn to restricting their gifts to capital projects mainly. They want to know what they're getting for their money. And so for us to really meet our equity goals and I think respond to the moment, we've got to grow our annual fund, the basic money with which we do things that are not necessarily project-based, but are money that we can apply to these initiatives. And we need to really create a value proposition that is distinct from Portland Parks and Recreation. This is our talk and our walk. Our independence and our community-driven approach is pivotal to building a stronger foundation to deliver more programs and projects. We want to expand our work with communities of donors and activists to manifest their desires for parks. We're committed to expanding this work to historically underserved communities. And to accomplish this, we have to grow our unrestricted income. And there are challenges to this, and we're currently involved in a series of meetings with PPR's leadership to figure out what our strategy is going to be one step at a time. I'll skip that one because I'm probably running over time. What's ahead? We're going to continue with the programs that I outlined earlier. Friends and Allies, next summit is in the spring. We are going to proudly be able to give out our first grant under the new Joey Pope Fund for Parks Leadership. This is something we worked on with the Pope family. For those of you who don't know her, Joey Pope was a titan of parks leadership from the private sector and was our founding board chair. And she and her family have put up a $150,000 challenge grant and will match up to $250,000. So we are actively working on that. We had a good week last week, raising over $50,000 for that fund. Green Dreams Public Conversation Series is going to sort of spin off of the Olmsted anniversary, the 200th anniversary of Olmsted. But we're going to kind of bring the lens out a little bit and look at some of the hidden histories behind Olmsted and the City Beautiful movement. Look at climate, social justice, and the landscape ahead, among others, with Corbin and Vivek Chandis, who's the head of, who's the chair of the Tree Commission. And then we're proceeding with another poster project, and we've selected the designers and the posters, and the parks: Cathedral, Mount Tabor, Thomas Cully, and Lewitt View. We last year we tried to do a downtown festival in the park blocks called Paseo. COVID dealt us a bad hand on that, but we proceeded with some videos of the performers and had a pretty successful campaign. But we're going full speed ahead on doing this next year. And our sponsors, many of our sponsors are coming back for it, and we're reviving our steering committee, and super happy to be working on that. And our first capital project since the Barbara Walker Crossing, which is the Rose City Playground. I think I've talked to this group about this before, but there's a sorry little playground at Rose City Park on the left there that's going to become the playground on the right. We're working in partnership with PPR on this, splitting the cost of it. We had a major donor come forward to pick up most of our nut on that. And it's a great little project. It's right across the street from the Ellington Apartments, which has 263 affordable units, Home Forward project, and about 200 kids. And it also serves a neighborhood with a high level of kids in lunch programs and who are, as the census tells us, non-white. And then lastly, going back to my time with Park Block 5, which was Director Park, I've always had an interest in O'Brien Square, and we're really hoping that we can work with PPR and the private sector to get this on its way to being reopened. It's I think of it as not part of the downtown fall, but actually the start of it. And so we'd really like to turn the history on this. So lastly, go back to this little Venn diagram. What we really want to do is expand everything and bring more community, a larger community of donors, activists, and advocates to help us out making our park system better. And I think that's it. Hopefully I didn't run too far over time, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the primer, Randy. That was really helpful. And I really liked your Venn diagrams because that's kind of my thing. Questions? Adrian, I see Adrian's hand up.
Thank you, Randy. That was really, really helpful, to get that level of insight to what you're working on and the intersection with Portland Parks and Rec. Curious in your interest in your perspective about how do you plan to kind of separate the role in the community's mind between the foundation and Portland Parks and Rec, what you see that vision is, and then also, how you will raise awareness of it.
Well, I think that really began when the foundation hired me, because I'm kind of a promoter, in many ways. I mean, a kind of repurposed journalist. And so by just, the foundation was known, but not super well. And I think it's just been, a sort of step-by-step, process, creating things like the Green Dreams lecture series, doing things like a street party in Burnside. These are not insignificant things to, build a constituency and build a story. And so, we have been working on this very hard. If you aren't on our snail mail list, I would encourage you to send me your address, and I'll send you a little booklet that we did that really tells our story in a kind of new and fresh way. And so the conversations that we're having with PPR's leadership, I think, will lead to a greater strategic sense of what our lanes are and how we're working together and how we're working separately. So that's the next and maybe the biggest step in this journey. But I think we did pretty well on our year-end fundraising, even though it was a tough year with projects getting complicated by COVID. And so I feel like it's working. But the most important step now is to really button down what our relationship is with the Bureau.
Thanks. Helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks. I see Stephen's hand up.
Thank you, Bonnie. And thank you for that, Randy. That was, as someone who's very new to this and trying to understand the commissioner's portfolio around parks and parks-related items, that was super helpful. I just wanted to know, I know we're going to be meeting again with the commissioner toward the beginning of February, but I wanted to know if you could share a copy of that presentation with me and or the group. I'd love to have it just to be able to draw from if I need some information and context moving forward.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to do that. There's probably a slide or two that I'll remove. Just that I don't want some of I skipped over it actually, but I'll take that stuff out. That's more of like kind of insider stuff, but happy to share the deck with you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Randy? Aaron, was that the level of primer you were hoping for or that the community engagement working group members were sort of seeking?
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I don't know if any of the members from that group that had questions have any questions. Giving space for that would be good. But people would probably raise their hand if they did.
Yeah, we do have We do have a little bit more time budgeted for this, but if not, did anyone from the community engagement group who had expressed an interest in that relationship have any questions that weren't answered? Okay.
I'm sorry, I just want to say one thing, which to clarify. So the foundation receives operating support from the city. Is that right, Randy? And so, and really the reason, and then you take, because the part of that is because it's hard to fundraise for operating support.
Right.
So you take that and then are able to fundraise off of that for more restricted type of contributions, which are easier to fundraise for from private donors, et cetera.
Correct. Yeah, it's it really started with the Barbara Walker crossing because that was such a huge lift, and the foundation at that time, it was still smarting from the Great Recession, and so needed a little boost. Our long-term goal is to work our way sort of off of that, but that's a sort of chicken and egg thing. How do you get the capacity to move beyond, and that's another part of the strategic thinking that we're working on. So yeah, but since we just one clarification, because Barbara Walker Crossing touched a lot of different entities, PBOT, PPR, Metro. That's why it comes out of the mayor's budget, because we imagine we'll be in the future working across bureaus as well.
And to clarify, Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, so that operating money, it comes from the mayor's budget, not from the Parks Bureau, is that correct?
Correct.
So that might be a distinction that people wanted to understand.
Yeah, I think it's an important distinction.
Okay, any other questions there? I do see we have Katie and Brett on the line to provide us.
Bonnie, looks like Corbin. Sorry, it looks like Corbin has a question.
Oh, Corbin, sorry, I missed your hand go up.
Not a problem. And maybe this is something to tackle later, but I was wondering, when you are making decisions around funding, whether that's a capital improvement or programmatic, are you also considering raising money for the staff of PPR that have to expand their services to accommodate these new parks or these new programs?
Corbin, that's never been a consideration, and I think for a number of reasons, and probably won't be, because I think that our donor base is clearly interested in funding things for the community, and I think it would be complicated receiving money from the city than to raise money to for staffing in the city. So our initiatives are really focused on community-based interests. So is that I feel like I'm giving you kind of a muddy answer, but
well, I mean, as we increase parks, we have to increase maintenance and making sure those parks stay up to par when we do have donors put money into our parks. And I was just wondering if it's more inclusive with that in consideration, maintenance, that sort of thing. But if it's not and it's separate, I can understand that as well.
Yeah, and I think the levy further complicates that, because I mean, levy clearly a large percentage of it is supposed to be going to maintenance, and so I think it would be virtually impossible to actually raise money for that, to be just super clear about it. The levy has definitely complicated our world a little bit, but it would definitely complicate if we were trying to go out and ask for money for staffing.
Thank you. I also wanted to note that Sabrina had sent a message right before this meeting that she couldn't make it. So I do think your deck would be really helpful, because I know that she was also probably interested in this, because she's a member of the Community Engagement Working Group as well.
And one last thing I'd like to add, if you don't, I see Patty has a question.
Yeah, Patty and Todd's hands went up, it looks like. Go ahead, Patty.
Thank you. when RAC started raising money for public art years ago, they had this 1% for art, which was 1% of any public, the construction cost of any public project. That worked well for a while, but they realized that there was nothing in the kitty for maintenance of that artwork. And so subsequently, it was revised to 1.5%, and the 0.5% goes towards maintaining the pieces, which is very, very important. And I wonder if a similar concept might make some sense in the context of what Randy's been discussing, that if there is a gift for a new capital initiative, that part of that gift be kept back specifically for maintenance of that facility, so that we make sure that it's properly looked after. I think this is one of the reasons we have, I'm sorry to get back on my hobby horse again, but one of the reasons we have this huge deferred maintenance problem is that no allowance has been made for very necessary maintenance of the things that we invest in as capital projects. So I'd really like to think about, not only in the foundation, but in the other projects, the capital projects we look at, thinking about a set aside for maintenance that comes out of the capital funding in the first place. Thank you.
Yeah, we haven't done that with earlier capital projects. We did do a maintenance set aside for Barbara Walker Crossing. And I think on larger projects, that should be certainly a consideration. Todd?
I was just going to help answer maybe from the Portland Parks and Recreation perspective about how to address the maintenance issue that Dr. Corbin was referencing, is at least from the parks perspective, as we receive gifts from philanthropy, whether it's Portland Parks Foundation or one of our nonprofit partners like the Japanese Garden, one of our considerations is to make sure that there is proper funding for the maintenance of the new facility that's either built, free and open to the public, or like the Japanese Garden that built, $35 million worth of improvements. But then in that agreement, they were responsible for maintaining those new things that they built. And so I think we've been kind of inconsistent of not having like the same tool that we've always used in the past of like how to make those decisions about, where there's true public benefit to the philanthropic gift. But I think the racial equity lens that our equity team has developed might be kind of a start in the right direction of maybe more consistently applying, how we assign those maintenance responsibilities. So I think there has been work in the past, and I think you can be assured that things that are being built in the system have operation maintenance dollars going to them now.
Thanks, Todd. The one thing I wanted to add is I have a tendency to talk about the things that we're doing and not the work that we're doing internally on ourselves. Over the last 2 years, we've also revamped our mission statement. We are about to approve, I think, knock on wood, our equity lens, which we are going to begin applying to all of our projects, not necessarily as a green light, red light, but just to begin really appraising how well we are walking our talk on that end. And so Jessica Green, our operations manager, has been doing some wonderful work on that with a core team of board members, and we're well, I won't say we're not at the finish line. We're for the next baton handoff, I guess, on that relay race. So to coin some sort of metaphor here, that my sleepiness is showing the blurriness of. So anyway, I did want to mention that that we are really striving hard to meaningfully contribute to change in our park system. So thank you all.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you for what ended up being a lot of questions and some good discussion. So with that, I see Katie Dunham and Brett are on the line to give you the full briefing on what Paul and Patty and I have been working with Katie on for the last 3 or so years. Katie, I'll hand it off to you.
Great, and good morning, everyone. So I'm Brett Horner. I'm the planning manager at Parks, and I'm joined by Katie on my team, Parks planner, who's done a lot of the work, the background work on the level of service. And you know, as Bonnie mentioned, it's something we've been working on for quite some time. It was a heavy lift. I think it involved a lot of research and listening and community outreach. And we're very happy to bring it to you today to share the information and let you know how we're using it and how we intend to use it and how it will be helpful in our planning going forward. What you're seeing today is kind of a very abbreviated high-level look at the whole effort. It's actually a great deal of information that can't be packed in easily into a slideshow. So there are documents that are coming out of this effort, an executive summary, and then some full reports on developed parks and natural areas, and another full report on community centers, which we're going to be rolling out to you. So you'll get a chance to review them, read them, and take a look at them going forward into January. So let's go to the next slide, Katie. So this is just an outline of what we'll cover today very briefly, just a definition of what level of service is. It sounds like a very nebulous term to many. So we'll go through kind of what it is. And then we'll talk a little bit how we're going to use it, how it folds into Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland, the framework planning that's going on right now. Picking up after the Parks 2020 vision. We'll talk about how we're going to use it and actually have already been using it in both our capital growth decision making and also our sustainable future work that is underway and that got sort of an initial look 2 years ago at City Council, the work session. So we've had this data for a little bit and have already put it to good use. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the implementation of it and how it will really help us meet our equity objectives. There's a short segment that Katie will do on the community engagement. So this whole effort is very much grounded and based in what we heard from people telling us what they wanted out of their park system. And then we'll go just very briefly on some of the things that we found, some of the things that we heard, and so you can get a flavor for that part of it. Go ahead and go to the next slide.
Brett, you were frozen.
Am I still frozen?
You're good now.
Okay, I might turn my video off. So I'm not seeing the next slide. Katie, is it on the next slide?
It doesn't look like it is.
I'm still seeing presentation outline.
Okay, great. Here we go. So here's what basically level of service is. The easiest way to kind of think about it is we have a level of service today. It's what we're providing Portlanders and the public in terms of our built assets. And I should clarify, first, this is really all about our built features in parks and parks themselves. So natural areas and parks. It's all about the assets and their distribution, their spatial distribution, and the proximity that residents are to each of those built things. So, today we have a certain level of service. You'll see a map in a few more slides that shows kind of where we are today with park service. And then it provides some target levels for where, based on what the community has told us, where we'd like to get and be at some point in the future. There's not a timeline or a promise in this. It's really just here's where we would like to be ultimately with all of our residents in terms of what we're providing. So it sets those targets over time, and as resources become available, so as the sustainable future work moves along, we can match kind of what people told us they want with our resource level, and then come up with more of a planned delivery for those assets. Okay, next slide. So just a couple clarifiers that will hopefully help you understand kind of what it will do and what it doesn't do. It's a lot of information, and you'll see that in the reports for a basis for decision making as we make investments in our capital assets and our provision of parks and natural areas. So it doesn't decide things. What you're looking at today is not something that says we must do this or that. It's really just a tool that we're going to be using to help make decisions. It does review costs over time. So it's looking at the full picture financially, not only the cost to build and provide the assets, but to maintain them over time and eventually replace them, renew them with a replaced new feature. We plan to update it very frequently. So maybe a full, sort of a full overhaul or look at it every 5 years. And that's, to be determined. It may be more frequently. The reason it's 5 years is there's a pretty heavy lift to engage the community and do the listening and the learning that we need to do. And there's a resource and staffing level that needs to be in place if we were to do it more frequently, but we do intend to update it. And you'll see how that works into the Healthy Parks, Healthy framework in a minute, how it's a cyclical process and will continually be improved. A couple of things that it doesn't do, again, it doesn't decide where and what assets we're going to be building. It just informs where we're deciding to do those things. It also will not override a specific park design effort. Many of you may be aware we're underway with a park design process at Mill Park in East Portland. And so there's a lot of listening that goes on with a specific location. And this will help inform that discussion, but it does not override it or say, you can't put this in this park because level of service is telling us we have one nearby or and things of that nature. It's also, again, very much the asset. It's not about operations. It's not about condition of assets. It's not about programming or the recreation, the recreation providing that we do around the assets. So very much asset-based and geographic location-based. Next slide. We already have some level of service targets in place. They came out of the 2020 vision plan, which is now sunsetted. We'll be looking at those again as we go into our Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland framework planning. And then there's some other planning that's already been done that sets some levels of service for instance, regional trails and our urban forest canopy. So the urban forestry management plan sets canopy targets and targets for tree coverage across the city and by land use that needs to be updated, and we plan to get to that soon. So again, renewing those and updating them as we are able to, we'll be doing that. Next slide, Katie. And then here's how we're going to use it. So in a moment, we'll see a slide of the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland framework. So I'll speak to that in a moment. We will be using it and have actually already been using it in our annual capital process. So when we're deciding where to make investments, we will use the level of service information to see where gaps are and where the most dire gaps are in terms of number of households and equity and what else is around. So if you're in an area that has many parks and many features, you're less likely to get investment in new things. If you're in an area that has very few and very good demographics in terms of our equity objectives, then you're more likely to get investments as we implement this. It was already used in the sustainable future work that went 2 years ago to council. So want to emphasize that there's a really down-to-earth, costed out, financially looked at what it would mean if we, if we were to make fill a lot of our gaps that we've identified. And then again, getting at equity. So knowing our gaps, first of all, is very helpful. But then knowing the type of gaps that we have is also critical. How many folks of color, how many children, how many people living or experiencing poverty in a certain gap are very important to know. So you may have seen this recently. This is the overall framework for the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland. The red star is kind of where we think the level of service work kind of will reside. And again, it'd be part of a circular system that gets updated and gets looked to frequently. We do more listening occasionally with the community on a regular basis. So it kind of sits in that actions and results and the policies and plans area. And even though we started this work before the framework planning started, we think it's going to fold and come out of the framework planning very nicely. Just a quick summary. We wanted to show you how we are deciding and making investments on new assets. This is a formula that we use to rank and score potential projects and investments. Thankfully, now that level of service is wrapping up, we have our service variety. And what that means is we look at, in a particular geography, say we're planning to put a playground in an existing park. We will first of all look at what's around that park and see how many other things, how many off-leash dog areas, how many sports fields, how many community gardens, how many of our other built assets are within that general proximity, and then it gets a score. So the more things that you have, the lower score you get actually, and the fewer things that you have at your ready and that are close by your home, the higher the score you get. And then we look at the number of households in that geography. So if it's a half-mile radius, we'll look at the number of households. More households serving, higher score, fewer households being served, lower score. And then equity is currently a function of the percent of people of color, the number of youth, so people under age 18, and then the percent of people experiencing poverty, so below the poverty line. And there's work underway to kind of refine this that Kenya's team is embarking on, and the Bureau will be looking at more carefully. We did notice in our work, in our level of service work, that there may be some improvements that we can be making to how we look at equity. Next slide. We wanted to show you over time, recent years here, showing fiscal years, the amount of investment on new things, some new built assets that are going to areas where we're targeting, higher populations of people of color and people experiencing poverty, and also where we've got a higher percentage of youth. So in the last 5 years, we've kind of averaged well over 80%. So we are making progress on that count. Next slide. And then you might remember this from the work that was done 2 years ago at City Council, looking at different scenarios. The level of service helped inform these scenarios, and the costs that we had derived from our level of service work were used in rolling out what it would mean if we didn't have a lot of new resources. So a decline in scenario 1, we would start to lose service and assets as they reach the end of their service life. A scenario 2, where we just kind of keep things in good shape the way they are today and don't lose or don't have to retire assets from service. And then the preferred one, which council wholeheartedly endorsed, was a fulfillment scenario where we actually bring more resources to be able to meet our service levels and deliver what folks have told us they want. So next slide. I'm going to hand things over to Katie. As I mentioned earlier, this work is very much grounded in what we heard from folks, and we did a lot of great community outreach over several years, actually, and in different methods that are outlined here. And I'll hand it over to Katie to take this.
Thanks, Brett. So as Brett mentioned, the community engagement approach that we had was to work directly with specific community groups, including communities of color, immigrants and refugees, and youth, to understand their developed parks and natural area needs. The first thing that we did was we worked with staff internally to have a number of questions on the community needs survey in 2017. We had over 2,000 participants in that survey, and we asked people how whether they would use a park asset and how close or far it needed to be from their home in order for them to be able to use it. We also did outreach at 36 culturally specific events that were hosted by community groups throughout the summers with a DOT survey that had over 1,100 participants. We worked with partners including IRCO, Verde, and the Black Parent Initiative to host 12 listening sessions in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Russian with 152 participants. We reviewed and incorporated information from other recent culturally specific efforts to plan parks, including D150, Millard Midland Park, Lewitt View, and other master plans. We incorporated additional data provided by the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan and the Metro Survey of Communities of Color's park and recreation needs. We also engaged park staff throughout this process to make sure that we understood their needs and in terms of our park assets. They helped us set up the project in 2015, and we held internal stakeholder meetings to develop and refine the level of service scenarios and draft report recommendations. When doing the community engagement, we didn't just talk about the 13 park assets that are part of this process and project. We also discussed what people need to support their use of parks and what barriers they have in visiting our parks. We heard several different themes while hosting community conversations. For example, cleanliness of our parks is very important to them. Cultural relevance in park development and in parks programming is also important. They want to be able to see themselves in the parks. Transportation and access to parks, including bus access and sidewalks to get in and through the parks, is really important to people. And older adults' access to parks, including paths and places to gather and programming for older adults in our parks. Safety and security in parks, including park staff presence and lighting, was recommended in our parks. We heard there are several assets that people thought should also be found in every park to support their use, including open space, restrooms, and trees. The level of service doesn't recommend that Portland Parks and Recreation put all the park experiences in every park that we mention here, just that we should talk with community members and have community conversations when we plan for our parks and evaluate each of these needs in the park planning process. We also involved the Parks Board. We involved all of you in this process and project. When it started in 2016, also during community engagement in 2018, and during review of findings in 2019. Bonnie, Patty, and Paul have also been great help to us to develop the level of service as our level of service subcommittee. They met with staff multiple times, reviewed project milestones, and discussed several difficult topics throughout this process, including appropriate service levels for each asset, capacity to serve demand in dense neighborhoods, deferred maintenance and new capital planning, and demand for reservable assets. This slide shows the current level of service, which is established in the Parks 2020 vision. The Parks 2020 vision focuses on keeping up with demand to serve a very increasing population as growth occurs. It established goals, objectives, and targets that were highly ambitious. The goal that applies to this project is to develop a park or a natural area within a half mile from every household. That has been the primary goal in parks development for the last 20 plus years here at Parks. It also recommends we provide a full service community center 3 miles from every household. These goals are foundational to the planning and work that we do. The level of service guidance for developed parks and natural areas then moves into the next step of planning, identifying what experiences and assets are provided within each of those parks and natural areas, and how much service each of those parks is actually providing to our community in terms of benefits. Next, the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland process is going to identify our new goals for the future. So this map actually shows the current level of service we are providing for developed parks and natural areas. Currently, 77% of households are living within the half mile of a park or natural area goal. This has been maintained despite significant population growth and held steady since the 2020 vision goal. However, we currently need 29 more developed parks or natural areas to serve the entire city in order to meet the half mile of park or natural area goal. This map also excludes community centers and other assets that we're not addressing in this work. This map is the first map for this process of the community level of service. There are 13 developed park and natural area assets that we looked at during the process, including ball fields, basketball courts, community gardens, dog off-leash areas, group picnic areas, play areas, natural areas open to the public, plazas, skate parks, sports fields, specialty gardens, spray play, and tennis courts. As I mentioned earlier, these were chosen by a staff working group because they are the assets that are most commonly found and the assets that we have the most information about throughout our system. This map itself shows the current density of all of those experiences across the city. Warmer colors, as you see here, red or orange, indicate more service. Blues and grays indicate less service. The map shows warmer colors in the central city and North Portland, where there are more park assets providing opportunity for a richer park experience, and cooler colors along the edges of the city and Southwest Portland and East Portland, where there are fewer assets and opportunities for park experiences. The map represents Portland's history, development, and growth. Much of this is due to the historical development of the city, which started from downtown and headed out east and southwest, and also reflects some of the topography issues that we have in Southwest, where it's more difficult to plan and have a developed park. In recent years, we've made concerted efforts to address this imbalance by increasing investments in East Portland with new parks like Lewitt View Park and the upcoming Park Lane Park. These maps will be useful for us in prioritizing where to locate future assets, in addition to evaluating other factors, such as density, equity, available funding, other capital projects, and analyzing parks owned by others that provide service also. This is the first slide on recommendations by asset. The recommended service areas for developed parks, assets, and natural areas open to the public vary in distance based on information that we heard during public outreach and from staff input. A couple of things to note in looking at this slide. In the community engagement that we did, we heard a high level of support for play areas within a half mile of their homes. So that's why play areas are recommended to be at a half mile. Families with children love spray play to cool off in the summer, and it's recommended to be within 1 mile of every household. Sports fields, we specifically discussed program fields and have additional recommendations for those we'll talk about in a future slide. We also heard there's a need for more informal fields. Dog off leash areas, we actually heard a lot of support for dog off leash areas because many participants have a different relationship with dogs They would like to see more dog off-leash areas because they allow everyone to use the park in a comfortable way. There's also a broad recognition as you move out of this circle toward the outside, that there are some things that people are okay traveling to because they go there less frequently. But when they do, they spend more time there. So this includes ball fields, plazas, specialty gardens, and tennis courts, which have a 3-mile level of service. This slide shows the level of service findings by asset for all 13 assets and provides the number of assets presently in our system that we're providing and the number we need to get to achieve the level of service. For example, Parks has currently 138 play areas and would need to build 42 new play areas to meet the half-mile level of service goal. Some assets currently meet the level of service goal for a number of facilities provided, so there's no additional assets recommended. For example, tennis courts. However, we're currently moving into that next step to do additional analysis and look at the condition and quality of our tennis courts to ensure that they're providing a full level of service with a playable surface and are usable and we're prioritizing future improvements to those current tennis courts. Sports fields, as you see on the bottom, although in the chart, it does not say we need additional sports fields because geographically we have enough sports fields within our system. However, we should build 1 to 2 more sports focused parks with multiple fields that have lighting and synthetic turf for year-round use in East Portland and Southwest Portland. This is because our current facility at Delta Park is currently providing most of the tournament and league play for the entire city and most of the region. And people are traveling all over the city to go to events there. Our programming staff would be better able to provide services with more separate facilities closer to home. This work also reconfirmed the half-mile vision 2020 community goal of the half-mile developed parks. Again, as you see here, we have 29 additional developed parks we need to get to reach that goal. So after all of that work, we know that Portland Parks and Recreation has limited resources at this time to implement the recommendation of this level of service guidance. We'll need to prioritize construction of these assets in areas of the city where the service levels are lowest and the equity and use equity to apply to identify areas within the city with the lowest spatial service levels, then service, equity, and other filters to identify which things should go first. We considered several factors in this work, including construction cost, operating and maintenance cost, and capital replacement. We worked with the Sustainable Futures team to choose 4 assets based on capital cost and O&M cost to further define additional near-term guidance. We've provided some near-term guidance for skate parks, natural areas, play areas, and spray play. And we'd like to focus specifically on a few of those and help provide better service throughout the city in a focused approach for those. As you can see here, this is an example of that prioritized recommendations for natural areas. The priority for acquisition and development of natural areas is already set in documents such as the Natural Area Acquisition Strategy and Restoration Plan, and focuses on habitat. This has resulted in all of our natural areas being located near and around our rivers and buttes, such as Forest Park, the Willamette River, in the Columbia Slough, and Powell Butte in East Portland. As you can see on the map, currently only 73% of people have access to nature within 2 miles of their household. There are currently gaps in East, Northeast, and Southeast Portland. During community engagement, we heard that access to nature is very important to people. They want nature close to them, and not everyone has cars to get to nature experiences. To provide a more equitable service throughout the city, a 2-mile level of service has been recommended. This reflects that people are okay traveling to our natural areas and spend more time there once they get there. The initial near-term recommendation is to provide service at Kelly Butte, which is shown in red on this map, and to complete implementation of the 10 initial nature patches which provide access to nature in our developed parks in areas where we currently do not have land to develop new natural areas. For example, in Southeast and East Portland, where there is white on this map. I'm going to hand this back over to Brett for the last few slides.
Thanks, Katie. And just to add to what the last slide, so we have a map of each of the assets like that. So that the one you saw was just natural areas. We have a map for all the other assets that we looked at, and that's the depth of this work that we've done. We just wanted to share that, and you'll see that when we roll out the documents for you to look at. So the next slide is about our community center work. So we also looked at our full service community centers, and I'd like to acknowledge Robin Johnson Craig, who's also in the meeting, did most of this work. And we didn't have enough time really to go into depth on the community center work today, but we wanted to show you this map, which shows our current service level. The blue kind of boxes or squares are showing the 3-mile service area for what we consider our 4 full service community centers. We are happy to bring the community center work to you at a future meeting if you want to get into a presentation and some more information on the community center work, because it is pretty fascinating what we found. You know, the community centers are at various levels of age and condition and size. Some of them are carrying a huge burden in terms of the number of households they're serving. So we're happy to bring that back. We're at about 70% right now, which is pretty good considering the population growth that's gone on in the last 20 years. And yeah, Adina put in the chat, full service community centers also have indoor pools. And so there's a link to the aquatics level of service that it comes into play there. So I'm gonna end here. I want to be able to have a little bit of time to answer your questions. I would also invite Patty and Paul and Bonnie to chime in here maybe first, because they did some heavy lifting and a lot of work with us again over time to really refine this and get it to where it is today. So, and our emails are here. We will get we'll get the copy of this slide deck to Saren, and she'll send it out to the group with all the meeting materials that you'll get after today. So thanks again.
Thank you, Brett and Katie, for the overview of that work. Paul or Patty, did you want to interject anything here? I wanted to make sure you had space to do so, or if anyone had questions.
Very, very briefly, I'd say thank you to staff for being as responsive as they have been. I mean, they came to us back in 2016 with the bones of the report. And we had some real reservations about some aspects of it. And they didn't just rock back on their heels and say, oh, really? They got on with it and did something about it. So I just want to offer some plaudits for that. Thank you very much.
And I'll just echo that staff did a lot of work on this, and it's really appreciated the level of detail that was developed in the course of the level of service study. And it was great to participate in it and hopefully contribute to it becoming a stronger document.
Yeah, I think I'll echo what Patty and Paul said. I do think that they incorporate a lot of our comments, particularly in the analysis of the community centers. As you all know, my concern has been and continues to be integration of density and mix of populations that are being served. I do think that it's clear, though, that the level of analysis that's been done for the community centers, which has been terrific, has not been done for the other asset classes. And, I know that that's obviously a capacity issue, but I do think that that's a really important point, because I do think that it did help to inform some of the direction that you're taking the planning for the community centers. So I do think that that's important. And then the other piece of feedback that we provided is relating to the natural areas, because, I think that, the concern about, of course, access to nature is important. I mean, certainly that's probably why most of us are even on this board. My concern, of course, is, I live in one of those white areas, which is considered unserved, and I really don't feel unserved. And I think in this time of so many demands on our resources, that 2 mile is maybe just a bit too aspirational, and want to think about, in terms of the demands that there are for parks and park services and assets. I wouldn't put that as a priority personally, but other than that, those were the only 2 long-term things that I think for me haven't been fully addressed. But thank you for the thorough report. And obviously, yes, it's all a work in progress. And certainly we can't address all of the level of service goals immediately. Adrian.
Yeah, this is really a great report, and love to see the objectivity around it is really impressive. I had one nerdy question about the math, and that was, it was a little unclear how services per person were really sort of being calculated, and therefore, so for example, some areas seem like they're maybe overserved, but they're much more dense. And so you visually see those services are overcrowded. So, a little bit more on that, a little more clarity, I think would be helpful. And then the other thing is, I assume pools are being considered separately, since I, didn't see them in this report.
Yeah, good points. So the pool service is really not a part of this yet. We haven't done that work, and only to the extent that indoor pools are looked at as part of our full service community center work. So the outdoor pools have not been, we haven't gotten to that level yet. We do have a sort of a target level for aquatic service that was done. It's fairly old. It was done in 2007 or 8, I believe. So we need to be updating that, and it's kind of on our list to get to when we can. And then good point about density. I think what we noticed in level of service, there are certain assets that are very highly sensitive to demand, not just proximity, and those are the reservable kinds of things, picnic areas, sports fields, things that are, people kind of get time and reserve time to do, and we want to make sure there's adequate capacity for those. So there are additional strategies, which we couldn't go into in the slideshow, that speak to those specific assets that have that sensitivity to the demand. So I think that helps get at your question. It isn't perfect. I think as we do this update, we'll need to be looking at this again and looking at the density factors.
We also, as Brett mentioned during the presentation, we do look at number of households when we are prioritizing our capital funds for new assets and new growth. So the level of service is kind of thought as this higher level prioritization. And then as we go into that annual process, we look more at the density in the neighborhoods and the households and the number of parks in those areas.
Thank you. And I want to note that Corbin also noted in the comments that proximity does not equal access, which is definitely a conversation we had, the group of us with Katie and Brett. So Ellie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was great to see natural areas on there. And I think Katie might have said this, but just thinking of, natural areas are important for people to have access to, but in cities, they're also really important for wildlife to have access to create corridors of connectivity throughout our city. And the areas like ballparks and community gardens are also really great places, even if it's not considered great nature for people to, naturescape and native plants and create those little pockets of food sources and whatnot for our other biggest users, which are wildlife. So, and one more comment, just in terms of, first, I'll just say it was a great presentation. It was so helpful and really informative, and I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask on equity on if disability was going to be considered in the future. I saw that, more than half of the people living in long-term poverty have one or more disabilities. So in terms of looking through an intersectional lens, it's really important to make sure that you're looking in a variety of ways. So just a note there.
Thank you, Allie. I have a meeting actually set up this week to talk to our ADA transition coordinator about integrating the work of the level of service into the work that she does and making sure that we are addressing those needs.
Thank you. I have two hands up and we have 2 minutes. So we'll take up the rest of the time for the meeting, but if anybody has any topics for future meetings, please email me and Casey and we'll consider those. So Nova and then Lauren.
I'm actually just going to lower my hand because of the time crunch. I'll follow up with my question later.
And I'll be pretty quick and just say, as Katie pointed out, Jill Hutchinson is our ADA coordinator. Ellie, to your question, and she's going to come and give her annual report in the future, probably. So.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Again, thank you, Brett, Katie. Nova, did you want to make your comment? We have the 2 minutes or maybe a minute and a half or so.
I just wanted to know who to follow up with to reach out about sports field service levels.
I'd say start with Brett and then Brett can triage it to the correct person. And on that note, I will also say, if board members ever do have questions like that and they're not sure who to go to, the folks on this call are the ones that you should, they're prepared to triage whatever kinds of questions like that we have. And if you really don't know who to ask, ask me or Casey, and I'll try to point you in the right direction. And if I don't know, I'll probably send you to Todd or somebody, and Todd will help me figure it out. Okay. All right. With that, any other closing comments for the meeting before we adjourn? Well, then we will adjourn and we'll see you next month. Thank you, everybody, for all your contributions today.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good week.
Thank you.